if anybody else wants to bring a dog in next week.
I'd leave it.
feel free.
Kringle's staying home.
Dogs can stay at
I
home.
said Kringle's going to stay home.
Yeah, that may be. Now, and I am only going to know where she is by watching y'all point and looking down.
Well, I handed the dog biscuits back, and she checked everybody to see
Who has the biscuits? Okay. All right. Well, we're talking about Genesis, and to this point, what are some of the patterns that we've seen in the book of Genesis? What are some of the patterns?
God and Lord.
Let's say that again.
God and Lord.
God and Lord. Now, tell me about that pattern with the God and Lord.
Well, God is in one part, and the Lord
Okay.
is a little further. The Lord is there for us.
Sure seems as though there are different traditions that have been brought together by, and we're going to call them a redactor, because that's what they're called. People who bring stories together into one narrative. It seems as though there's a redactor bringing in different traditions. And one seems to use the name God for God, like in chapter 1, where that's what he's called, El, or Elohim. And then you have others that use those 4 letters that spell the proper name for God that you're never supposed to say. You're never supposed to say it out loud. And when and I mentioned this before, when they would read it aloud, they would say, when they got to those letters, they would say Adonai, which is translated Kyrios in Greek, which is translated Lord in English. And I know I told somebody in the Luke study, and he's told other people, which is kind of neat. He said, I never realized when you see capital, the capital letters in the Old Testament, like in the Psalms, capital L-O-R-D, that's when the proper name for God is used. But in a lot of translations, that's what they're going to translate, because that's the way it would be read. Yeah.
I don't need to come, because I get blown.
Yeah, I know. You hear about it. And even better, because it's kind of condensed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't go on and on and on. Okay, so anyway, that's what we got these strains, right? And these 2 strains in the tradition that the redactor is bringing together, because he believes both of them are valid. Like you've got in chapter 1 a creation story, and then you got chapter 2, which seems like it's another story. I mean, with a different origin and a different structure. And in fact, humanity, the role it plays is different, because one is at the end and one, humanity, is created at the beginning. So you seem to have these 2 different stories. And we've seen it. We saw it in the Noah story, where you had 2 of every kind, and then you had 7 pairs of clean, animal, which is different. I mean, it's just different. And one is a Lord story, and one seems to be a God story. And we saw it with Abraham. You remember how we saw it with Abraham? Remember, we had the covenant made,
and then the promise.
That's right. And so we have this, and the covenants always deals, or contracts. And the one covenant, the first covenant, which is a Lord covenant, the Lord wants trust. That's what this is what I'll do. Land, same thing coming from God, right? What are the 2 things that God is going to give according to the covenant?
Grace.
Going to give, what's the 2? Well, very tangible things. 2 very tangible things. You remember what they are?
Animals and land.
They're going to give land, and they're going to give people. People and land. You're going to be the descendants. Well, I don't know about your family. Some families it would be animals. That's more a Rudiger thing. Where you got a bunch of animals together. But you're going to have land, and you're going to have people. And that's one. And the first covenant, when we look at the Lord covenant, the Lord wants what from Abraham? Or Abram? You remember what he wants? He wants trust. He wants trust. He wants him to trust it. I'm sending you to a land. I want you to trust that I know where I'm sending you. And you're going to have to follow and just do it on trust. Also tests. trust. The other covenant, though, is a God covenant. And what is God looking for?
Obedience.
He's looking for obedience. And that's when he says, you got to have your people circumcised. Nothing to do with trust. You don't have to trust anybody to be circumcised.
Oh, yeah, I bet you.
Well, yeah. Well, let me take that back. Yeah, I guess you do have to trust the one holding the knife. I keep on thinking of that Seinfeld episode, with the moil. You got to trust the guy who's got the knife. But it's obedience. I want you to obey, and that's your side. Well, you got these two stories, and the redactor thinks both of them are important. So we got that. What other patterns do we have? Do we see in that? So we've got this Lord. It's kind of faded a little bit as we've gone further in. It used to be very, very clear that the Lord stories, God is very personal. He talks to people. He appears to people. He's the one that forms human beings out of clay, out of dirt. The God stories, God tends to be more...
Speaking.
Yeah, distant. Speaks. He speaks from heaven. He appears in dreams. He's not quite as tangible as the Lord. So you've got these different strains written at different times to different people. What other pattern do you see?
Mercy and grace.
Okay, you got mercy and grace. And where do we see mercy and grace in this story?
The twins?
Okay, we see it with the twins. Now we've got which twins?
Jacob and Esau.
Okay, you see Jacob and Esau. And you got something else going on with those twins, right? What happens with those twins, Jacob and Esau? It becomes kind of interesting when you think about the story.
That God does what he wants to do.
What's that?
God does what he wants to do.
God does what he wants to do. In fact, Paul makes a big deal of it in the 9th chapter of Romans, because he quotes Malachi, because Malachi makes a big deal of it. What is it with Jacob and Esau that's so interesting?
God hates the man.
God, it says in Malachi, and Paul quotes, God hates who? Esau, but loved Jacob. And even though hate and love, which is hyperbole, isn't part of Genesis, we do have in Genesis what? What's going on in Genesis?
The secondborn is getting more than the firstborn.
The secondborn is going to be the one that's going to be on top. The firstborn is going to serve the second, which ain't the way it is. And the second, particularly, the second one was more righteous, right?
No.
Was a more noble person. Jacob was a more noble person, right? God could see the potential in Jacob, right? And no.
He did it because he wanted to.
Oh, Jacob was awful.
Yeah.
Oh, he was awful. What are some of the awful things Jacob did?
He cheated.
He cheated all the time. Who did he cheat?
Everybody.
Yeah, he cheated his dad. Yeah, let's write the list of people Jacob
His brother.
cheats. He cheats his dad. He cheats his brother.
His father-in-law.
His father-in-law, but who hasn't done that? No. Cheats his father-in-law. Of course, his father-in-law
Is a cheat too.
was a cheat too. Got rid of the homely daughter. So they're all cheating. Everybody. So Jacob lives up to his name, because his name means
Supplanter.
yes, supplanter, cheat, liar. He comes out grabbing his brother's heel. This is not good. He's not a nice guy. So, and yet, what do we see with Jacob and Esau?
The Lord blessed him.
The Lord's going to bless him. Why is the Lord going to bless him?
Because he wants to.
Because he wants to. Because he wants to. That's it. Which tells us what about God?
He's forgiving.
He does what
Well,
he wants to
he's
do.
forgiving.
He's in control.
He's in control. He certainly is forgiven, but he's certainly in control. Because if he were going to pick someone based on quality, there is zero chance he would pick Jacob. And the writer of the stories almost goes out of his way to sort of establish that. Okay, so we've got that. Any other patterns that you see going on?
That it's about God.
And tell me about that. How is it about God?
It's how he deals with man's shortcomings.
Okay. And humanity has
A lot.
a lot of shortcomings, as you go through the story. It's really this is God's story, and how God is working this promise out. Remember, right at the beginning, I said that I think you could look at the 4 main stories right at the beginning before we get to chapter 12. And all of them have that same pattern about how God is working things out. You have humanity, God establishing, humanity messing up, humanity paying the consequence, God showing grace. Showing grace. And that seems to be a pattern. And you know, when I just did that, I don't, what that's called, that pattern is called, is called chiastic, a chiasm, that you go in and you go out. You know, humanity, God establishes, humanity messes up, humanity pays the consequences, God is gracious. And we've seen that, and what God is being gracious, if we look at these stories about Abraham and about Isaac and about Jacob, you know, God is being gracious to a problem humanity had. You remember the issue that sort of starts these patriarchal stories?
Man's free will.
Well, in man's free will, in doing what? There was a specific story that sort of initiated the beginning. Well, Adam and Eve before, because we had Adam, remember, we had Adam and Eve, can't eat from the tree, can't live in paradise anymore, not innocent anymore, but God's going to make them close. Cain and Abel, same thing. Noah, same thing. Then we had the story of Babel, right? And Babel, humanity is going to build a tower and
Become God.
And God does what?
Spreads them out.
Scatters them, and they
Changes
can't even
their
communicate with one another. But in that story, we don't have that grace at the end. Except in the next chapter when it says, there was a man named Abram. And then this whole thing is working out that problem established that was the result of Babel. You know, that God is working out a new humanity through a blessing to humanity through Abraham. Okay, so that's what we ended. Now we looked at Abraham, and who are the patriarchs we've talked about? The fathers we've looked at. Abraham, we've looked at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All of them encountered certain issues. What were common issues in each of these situations with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that the writer must love, because he repeats the same thing? The wives. What's the problem with all the wives?
They're
barren. They're all barren. You know, throw a dart, you're going to hit a barren woman. You know, that's just the way it is. And they're all, and that gives what? God the opportunity to do what?
Show his power.
To show his power, because he's going to overcome this inherent problem. But that's something similar to in each of the situations. Neither Abraham nor Isaac were exemplary people. Because remember, Abraham lied about Sarah twice. Isaac lied about Rebekah once. Same lie, same story, but same lie. So neither one will be presented as these paragons of virtue. God's in control. You know, God uses flawed human beings to do his will. Now, we've pretty much finished the Jacob stories. Where are we with the Jacob? What has happened by the time we get to chapter 37 with Jacob? What's occurred with Jacob by the time we get to 37?
He's
seen his brother.
Okay, he's met his brother, right?
Okay.
And because that was a big problem, because his brother wanted what?
Kill him.
Wanted to kill him, right? And Jacob did these noble things and trying to buy off his brother, but reconciled with his brother, right? So Jacob and Esau are reconciled, right? And Esau goes his way, and Jacob says, I'll follow later, and then
He goes
in the opposite direction. But the opposite direction happens to be where?
Promised land.
Into the promised land. Because Esau is going to Edom, is going outside of the land, but Jacob goes in. So Jacob is in the land, reconciled with his father-in-law, whom he cheated. Now, he's got, and this is that wonderfully noble story about how he has all his kids, because he's having kids by
This one.
wife number one,
Servant number one.
servant number one,
Servant number
two, wife number two, so he's got all these kids. And when we look at the wives, when we finish chapter 6, what's the situation with his family and the wives?
Non-harmonious.
Well, it's not harmonious. You know, what else did we see happen? As we start 37, what do we already know by reading the story?
Who the chiefs are?
Does he have all of his wives?
Oh, no, the first one, the one he liked the most.
Rachel.
Rachel. She died and he bought land, so now he owns land in the
Now
promised land.
he owns land. Really, file away when we talked about the Abraham and the Isaac stories, the land they own is in the south, is in the southern part of the land. The land that Jacob ends up buying is in the northern part of the land. That's significant only in that these stories tend to have a northern tint. The Jacob stories and his family tend to have sort of a northern feel to them because it quotes places in northern Palestine where the Abraham and Isaac stories were places in the south.
So that means north is better?
Well, it turns out, who becomes, let me ask you,
the
who
north-
becomes the one of the 12 tribes from whom Jesus comes?
Judah.
Which are the tribe of Judah, right? Tribe of Judah. So you would say the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Jesus, would be the important one, right? Not the tribe of Issachar, right? Or Naphtali, right? Judah. Where is Judah?
Judah's in the south.
Judah's in the south. Judah's in the south. Jesus had a southern accent. Everybody knows that.
But it
That's where
also
was.
divides the kingdom for later on
Yeah.
whenever, you have the northern kingdom and the southern
Right.
kingdom.
Right. And so you had some northern tribes, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But so we've got this going on just to file away. It's going to be a lot of northern stuff in locations like Shechem and Bethel. Those are all cities in the north. Okay, so we've got Rachel dead though. She died in childbirth, right? And you remember who was born? Benjamin. So the last son, the last of the 12 was born, but Rachel is gone. Has exited the scene by the time we get to chapter 37, verse 1. And how does chapter 38, or I guess, are we on 38 or 37?
I don't know.
38? Okay. How does 38 begin? Where does it tell us about Jacob?
Well, he left his brother.
Well, okay, his brother, we're finished with that. He's into the land. What does the writer tell us in verse 1?
That Judah went to stay with
Okay,
somebody else.
then we're up at 37. Then let's look at 37. Where is Jacob? Verse 1, 37.
Where is
He is in the land of Canaan. So it's like the writer is pausing here to make sure we know what? Where Jacob is at, right? Interesting though, it's Jacob, right? Now, why is that kind of interesting? That it says Jacob is in the land of Canaan. Why would that cause you to go,
That's where his father stayed?
Well, that's where his father stayed.
His father didn't want him to be around women in the kingdom.
Okay, that was a problem. You didn't want, because everybody knows Canaanite women are what?
bad.
What's the two words? No good. Thank you, Barb. Canaanite women are no good. But something else is odd. That Jacob is in Canaan. Jacob is in Canaan. Huh. What
Where
was
is
one of the
Canaan?
things that happened to Jacob? And in fact, happened to Jacob twice in what we looked at last week.
His brothers hated him.
His brother hated him. Yeah. But he kind of reconciled that. And I certainly don't hate my brother, that's a good-looking guy. So something happened twice last time that makes the idea of Jacob in Canaan kind of odd. What happened to Jacob twice?
Twice it makes brother jealous.
Yeah.
And he's,
What about his name?
Oh, Israel.
Yeah, his name was
Got
changed.
to Israel.
Right. How many? Twice it was changed. Once the story of him wrestling the man and changes, and then later, a different, his name when the covenant is made again with Jacob. Twice his name is changed, right? Mm-hmm. And now he's called
Jacob again.
Jacob, but he won't be called Jacob in a few verses anymore. So that's kind of odd. Shows we're talking about different stories and traditions floating around.
Could it be a time shift?
It could. I think it could be as the redactor is pulling stories.
Okay.
As he's pulling stories. It's only one verse. He's in Canaan. So he's maybe pulling that from something that's much earlier, and then from there he's going to be called Israel. Jacob's going to be called Israel. So he's in the land of Canaan. That's a good, and the writer wants us, clearly he must be starting a new story because he tells us what? He gives us a location, and what else does he give us?
An age of 17.
Okay, talks about who's being 17.
Joseph.
Okay, Joseph is 17. And what the writer says is what I'm about to tell you is the story of the family. I'm going to give you the story of Jacob's family. Now, we got Joseph, who's 17 years old, and we already know something about Joseph. What do we know about Joseph?
He's the favorite son.
He is the favorite son. He's the one that Jacob loves. And if we don't know it, if we don't remember it, we're going to find out in this story a little bit, because the writer's going to tell us. But we already know because Joseph was the son of
Rachel.
And his favorite wife. So Joseph is the favorite. He's working in the flocks, right? And as he starts this story, what's the context? What situation? We got Joseph identified. Here's Joseph. And what is he doing?
he is tending the flocks in ornamental rows.
He is tending the flocks. Is he doing it alone?
With his brothers.
He's doing it with his brothers, and in particular his brothers not his full brothers. Because if we looked at the story, Joseph only has Benjamin as a full brother. So the rest are half brothers, right? And these half brothers, what's that?
He tattles.
Well, these half brothers are his half brothers by not Israel's other wife. It's from the two servants. So he is working with his brothers, half brothers by the servants, and Joseph does what every brother wants his younger brother to do. He tattletales. My great-grandmother used to say it made no sense at all. Tattletale tit, your tongue is slick, and all the little puppies will come and have a lick. Yeah, I have no idea what it meant. But she used to say it all the time.
If you didn't tattle, she wouldn't have said.
If she were here, I'd tell her that you said that. Yeah. Okay, so he's a tattletale, right? He's telling on his brothers, which of course makes his brothers love him, because that's exactly what brothers want, to have one brother tattle on another. Now, what else do we know? So we know he's a tattletale. What else do we know about him?
Jacob loves him more than the rest.
Oh, Israel loves Jacob. Loves Joseph. Loves him more than his brother because he is a son of his old age.
But what happened to poor Benjamin in this whole thing?
Well, we're going to find something else that creates a little issue, which tells us, we're talking about a redactor putting together stories that were sort of independent. He's not writing a narrative, he's putting together a narrative. Because Rachel's going to end up being alive, in this. So we're kind of going back and forth in terms of time. Okay, Israel loves Joseph more than his other brothers. And of course, Israel does something that all the other brothers are going to endear Joseph with the brothers.
Gives him the
He makes him a coat. He makes him a coat that has
many colors.
the multicolored coat has long sleeves. And it's wonderful. Now, in terms of Joseph, has Joseph done anything to deserve the attention?
He was born.
Yeah, he was born. Yeah, he worked hard at that. Yeah, it was not just born, he was born of the favorite wife. So, Joseph has earned that coat he got, right?
Oh, yeah.
And again, the writer tells us that his brothers saw him strutting around in his coat of many colors. And his brothers say, "Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad he's benefiting. I didn't get one, but I'm happy for my brother."
They hated him.
They hated him. They hated
That's the
him.
reason I sold.
What's that?
That's the reason.
Oh, it gets even better.
Yeah.
Like this writer is making sure the brothers hate him, right? Because not only does he tattle on his brothers,
He has
and they
dreams.
hate him. And not only does Dad like him better than me.
God likes him better too because he gives him these dreams.
Oh, yeah. Joseph starts having
Dreams of importance.
dreams. And what's the first dream?
Get the stalks and stand up and be up.
Yeah, when you're
11 of them.
harvesting, yes,
11 of them.
yeah, you got these stalks of grain there, and
They all gather around Joseph's stalk.
they all gather around Joseph and they bow down. And the brothers say, "Oh,
Oh, that's going to happen,
what a nice dream.
Yeah.
Kind of makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, right? When little brother has a dream that we're all serving him. That's certainly. And Joseph, thank you for sharing it. Yes, thank you for sharing that dream with us. What did
But it wasn't a problem until Mom and Dad had to bow down.
Yeah, well, that's in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the Andrew Lloyd Webber, Tim Rice musical. That's one of the lines in it, that he must be really dumb because he's sharing this dream to his brothers, knowing his brothers
Hey,
Don't-
are going to hate him. But that's not part of the story, so we don't want to judge Joseph's intelligence. All we know is he shares the dreams, and his brothers
Hate him more.
hate him for it. But it's not just one dream, it's another dream. And what's the other dream?
The moon and stars.
Oh, stars in the heavens. And now it's going to be sun and moon too. Mom and Dad. And the other stars. And we're forming a nice little constellation. We're all getting along and everybody's happy.
Probably a nova.
No, what are the stars doing?
They're bowing down.
The stars are bowing down to him. But not just the stars. The moon and the sun are bowing to Joseph. Now, even Israel and Rachel get ticked about that, right? Because they tell him, "What are you doing? You can't be doing this kind of stuff." The writer, now, if we look at this story, and if we kind of look at it as a story, as like a short story, what is the writer doing? These are well-crafted stories. What is the writer doing?
Setting the stage.
He's setting the stage. He's giving the brothers motivation for what they're going to do. So what they're going to do is not just dropping out of the sky. The writer of this well-crafted ancient story is giving us motivation. Just like any writer would do. So he's explaining in great detail why the brothers absolutely hate him. Now, in verse 12, so we've got the background, the motivation established. They got 3 reasons to hate him. 4 if you care, you separate the 2 dreams. What's happening in verse 12?
the brothers are off taking care of the sheep.
Okay, the brothers are taking care of sheep, and they're near a city called Shechem. Now, we've seen Shechem before, right? We've seen the name Shechem before. You remember when we saw Shechem before? Dinah? You know, the story of Dinah, and, you know, when the Levi and Simeon, you know.
Have the men circumcised.
Yeah, have the men circumcised because Shechem rapes Dinah, and he wants to marry her, and they say, sure, but you got to have, everybody's got to be circumcised. And as they are healing up, what do Simeon and Levi do? Kill them all. Kill them all and let God sort them out. You know, so they kill them all, and then the other brothers come and take all their stuff. So we have seen, so Shechem isn't a word name that we're unfamiliar with. Here, though, it designates what? We're talking about a city, right? A location. You know, and I told you before, one of the things that the writers do, and remember, this is all written for generations that are in the future. It's sort of explaining, you know, how did you get your name? How did this city get its name? Well, let me tell you. There was a guy named Shechem. You know, how did these people get their identity? Well, let me tell you. There's a guy named Ishmael. You know, all of them are, you know, Moab. Good night, the Moabites are awful. You know, why are the Moabites so bad? Well, let me tell you about their background. You know, it has to do with Lot and his daughters. Let me tell you that. You know, so they're establishing backgrounds in this story that might be meaningful to people later. And so sometimes you'll shift between people with names and locations with names. Anyway, so we've got, they're looking after flocks near Shechem. And
the fact that they could graze their sheep there was because there weren't any men left to keep them out.
That's right. There weren't any male shepherds. So they're watching their flocks, and again, well-crafted story. Israel does what?
Sends Joseph
come
to check
here.
out and
I
see
got
what
a job
they're
for you.
doing.
Yeah, and what's the job? Go check on your brothers. You know, and Joseph puts on his multicolored coat, and he goes tooling down the road, right, to see his brothers.
And they're not where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, they're not where they're supposed to. So he gets to where they're supposed to be, and what does he do? What does Joseph do?
He stops and asks
For directions, which means he is not a true man, because he does stop and ask for directions instead of just wandering in the desert for a while and then complaining that, well, that's neither here nor there. So he asks for directions, and the guy he meets says, I saw a bunch of guys over there, right? And so Joseph goes over there. And as Joseph is going over there,
the coat stands out.
The coat stands out. What ends up? They see, the brothers see him, right? And what do they decide to do? What do the brothers decide to do? Well, you know, and they even call him. I love the way this is phrased. When they start making the decision to kill him, what do they say to one another?
Here comes the dreamer.
The dreamer's got to go. You know, the dreamer we are tired of his dreams. We're tired of him tattling, and we're sick and tired of that stupid coat he's always wearing. You know, we're going to make sure those dreams, our dreams, are going to come true, not his, right? Now, why are they doing? Now, we've already established motivation, right? What is motivating their action? Jealousy. Ooh, jealousy. I've heard that before. When's another story where fratricide, killing of one's brother, was motivated by jealousy?
Cain and Abel.
Same sort of thing. I don't think it's an accident. We got brother against brother, and it's all motivated by jealousy here. So they see him at a distance. We're going to kill him. But then someone steps forward to interfere with the plan. Who steps forward?
Reuben.
Reuben. And what do we know about Reuben?
He was firstborn.
He was the firstborn. So he is the eldest.
He's looking to get back in his good graces.
Well, yeah, he's got a little problem. What was the problem that the writer, the redactor, threw into the story that kind of knocked Reuben down a peg?
Take any blood?
Well, no. You know, if you made a movie of Genesis,
There'd be a lot of
it
pain
would have at least an R rating.
At least.
You know, at least an R rating. You couldn't get by with a PG-13. You know, because Reuben gets into trouble because,
one of
you know,
one of the wives.
well, not even one of the wives, one of the concubines, which are sort of wife-like. You know, they're kind of a wife with quotation marks. You know, they're occasional wives. And one of his dad's concubines, he ends up taking out on a date. And that's
A no-no.
That's a no-no. Now, we're going to see that later in the story because that's exactly what so David and Absalom. That's what Absalom does to David later. You know, as a sign of power, he ends up taking David's concubines. Not
a smart
that
move. Not a smart
You know,
move.
but I mean, it is a power move when you do that. So
Yeah.
Reuben is exerting his power, and that's not pleasing to Israel. So Reuben's kind of been knocked out, but here he steps up as into this story, Reuben. And we don't see Reuben much in the Genesis story, but he steps in here. And what is he trying to do? What is Reuben doing in the story? What does he suggest?
He said, throw him in.
Okay, instead of killing him, let's throw him in. Let's not even rough him up. Let's just throw him in a pit. And what is Reuben thinking?
That he's going to get back in his father's good graces.
Yes, because he's going to do what? What's Reuben going to do?
Save.
He's going to come and save
Save the
you know,
pit.
after a while, the brothers, throw him in a pit, leave. Reuben, I'm going to come and save my brother. Now, it's not. I don't think it's a coincidence that when you look at the tribal land later, and we're not there yet. We're not going to be there until
After they come out of Egypt.
into Joshua, where the tribes get land. Reuben is going to be one of the northern tribes. He's going to be a northern tribe. And so this hero, because I said these Jacob Israel stories tend to be northern stories. This is a northern son stepping forward to be the hero of this story. By the way, Joseph, his sons, and they're the ones that are going to carry the promise, they're going to be northern tribes. Ephraim's going to be the big one. But they're going to, so he's going to reverse what the brothers intend, right? And so they're going to go and say he's going to save him. Now, what do they do? What do the brothers do?
They take his coat.
They take his precious coat, the one, in case we forgot what kind of coat it was, it's the one that has long sleeves. Yeah, long sleeves. And they do what to it?
Throw him in the pit.
Well, not yet. What do they do to Joseph?
They
Put him in a pit. Right? Because that was the deal. They're going to put him in a pit. And then what do they do after they put him in a pit?
Eat.
They go out and eat. They're going to, well, because you've already done what you need to do. Hey, Coco, come here. So they put him in a pit. Now, what happens after they put him in a pit?
Ishmael, Reuben had to go off somewhere. I'm sure of this because
Here's another example. We got these two traditions. We got two traditions, not the two, because these are the two stories that are kind of meshing together. Because we got a bunch of Ishmaelites come. Now, we know a little bit about Ishmaelites.
Mm-hmm.
The Ishmaelites are who?
Abraham's other
Yes,
son.
the other son, descendants of the first son of Ishmael, Hagar. So you have a bunch of Ishmaelites coming by, right? And what are the Ishmaelites evidently doing?
Trading.
They're trading, and it's kind of interesting because they're up north in Palestine, and Edom is going to be south. So the Ishmaelites, it's kind of like you're probably not going to get there. You're not going to get to Egypt going the way they're going. But that's okay. We're not worried about that. We got a bunch of Ishmaelites. But then all of a sudden, who is stepping forward here?
Judah.
All of a sudden, Judah steps forward. And what does Judah suggest?
Let's make some money on this.
Let's not leave him to die. Let's sell him. Now, selling him is actually better than letting him die in a pit, right? So if in one story we got Reuben stepping forward, I'm going to save him. Here, Judah is preventing the brothers from killing their brother. Okay, and Judah is the tribe of
Jesus
and the south. So we have this little incursion of a southern tribe, Judah, playing a role in this story. Now, what makes it confusing and shows that we're talking about the same story coming from different sources is all of a sudden the Ishmaelites become Medians, becomes a different people because they become Median traders. And so we're talking about blending two stories together into one. We're not worried about it.
Is there any good people in here?
No, they aren't. And why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that's the case? That it's hard. You are hard pressed to find a good person. Jeez Louise, a good person in Genesis. Every time you think they're good,
they do bad.
They do something really
They have free
not
will.
so good. Well, they certainly have free will, but we're talking about this is a writer putting together the basis of the whole history and theology of his people. It would be like writing about the founding fathers and only focusing on the bad things. America's a great country. Let me tell you how bad George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams are. Let me tell you what seedy cheats they were. You know what? We wouldn't be able to teach it in most schools. Right? That would be bad. Because we don't want to think that of our founders. Our founders are good. In fact, bigger than life. They are the heroes of the story. These guys are not heroes. They are heroes. Which shows us what?
God's in control.
That God's in control. It is God's story, not theirs. Because they're all flawed. They are all flawed people. And I think this, in the background too, is this concern, which becomes a big concern later, is that you don't worship idols and images. And so you don't want to deify these patriarchs and make them superhuman. Instead, they are people with flaws just like you. But God is still going to use them. God's still going to use them. Okay, so we've got...
It really seem pertinent that no one is righteous.
No one is righteous.
No one is righteous.
And even when we get, like with the Noah story, we finally get a righteous man. Because the writer says, Noah was a righteous man. Whoa. Whew. Finally we got a hero.
Until it gets off the ark.
Yeah, until it gets off the ark and plants a vineyard. And then he pardons. None of them, all of them have feet of clay. And yet God is constantly. Doesn't mean they don't do good things, because Abraham certainly shows an enormous amount of obedience, which is that God's story with Isaac. That God said, sacrifice Isaac, and man, he was going to do it. He had a knife in his hand. He was going to do it because God told him to do it. You do. And that shows obedience, that Abraham is going to keep his side of the covenant. But even that, we read it and we say, wow, killing your son. Whoa. Okay. None of these, this is God's story. These are not meant to be major heroes. Same thing's going to be with Moses. That's why Moses can't go into the promised land. He isn't going to be presented as a paragon of virtue. He's going to end in Aaron's a mess. So all of them are flawed, but it's God that's driving the story. Anyway, so we're going to sell them to the Ishmaelites, the Midianites. And Joseph they make the deal, right? And Joseph's gone, right?
On his way to Egypt.
Heading towards Egypt. What do the brothers then do?
They get his coat and dip it in.
I bet they were happy. They finally got that coat. That stupid coat. And what are they going to do with it?
Show Dad.
They're going to tear it and they're going to dip it in goat blood. And they're going to show Dad what?
That he's dead.
That clearly Joseph is dead and has been slaughtered, consumed by wild animals. That's why the only thing we could bring back was the coat. We can't bring back anything else because everything else is gone. And so they go. Then in the story, Reuben comes back and
he's really sad.
He's gone.
There's his chance.
He's not here. So the brothers, when Reuben left, killed him. And so Reuben feels grief. He feels grief at the death of his brother. So Reuben is kind of a noble person. If he hadn't done what he did with the concubines, you might even say Reuben was a nice guy, but no, he wasn't. Not that nice. So we've got Joseph. The boys bring the coat back to poor old Israel, and they show Israel the coat, and Israel says,
Mourn forever.
"Oh, I'm mourning forever. Oh, this is horrible, horrible, horrible.
But they call him Jacob again.
Yes. We got the names going back and forth. This is a horrible, horrible thing, right? And so he is mourning, and what is happening to Joseph?
He gets sold to Potiphar.
Oh, well, we're going to find that out. Right now, all we know is he is going to Egypt. He is heading. He gets sold by the Midianites to Potiphar. Yeah, one of Pharaoh's officials. And then that story ends.
The captain of the guard.
Person of importance, may play a role later. Mm-hmm. Clearly, if we take the next chapter out, they all connect. But the redactor has put this other story in the middle, which is an interesting story. And Judy's not here, so I can't say to her, did you teach your children in Sunday school class this story? Which is a good biblical story. I've never seen a cartoon on this on Saturday morning about this. Who becomes the star of this next story that we see in 38?
Of Joseph's, I think Tamar becomes
Okay,
the star.
we've got
Tamar
Judah. We got Judah,
star.
right? And Judah does what? Right at the beginning? What does Judah do?
He left his brothers and down.
Okay, he leaves his brothers, and by the way, goes south because these are southern locations. And what does Judah do?
He meets
a Canaanite woman. And what do we know about Canaanite women? They are no good. Canaanite women are no good. And what happens with Judah and the Canaanite woman that he marries?
They have kids.
They have kids. And how many kids do they have?
3.
They have 3 kids, right? And one of them is and one of them is an Onan, and one of them is Shelah. And so we've got, and Judah does what for his firstborn?
Marries them off to
Tamar.
Tamar.
Marries the first one off to a woman named
Tamar.
Okay, marries the first one to Tamar. Now, what is, okay, so he's married to Tamar. What happens to
Er's not so good.
is not a good boy. He does things evil in the sight of the Lord. We don't know what it is, right? But it's bad. So he does something really bad, and what happens to
He was put to death.
he
Dies.
expires. He becomes a former I don't know. So he leaves this mortal coil, right? Now, evidently, this is a tradition.
They have
That they know.
kinsman redeemers.
Yeah. That's right. It's really tough on Tamar because she's lost her husband. And so the tradition then is, and evidently it's known well enough that he doesn't have to explain it. The writer doesn't explain it. What is the tradition?
Kinsman redeemer.
Okay, if one brother dies, then it becomes the responsibility of
The next one in line.
the next brother. But the next brother, if they have children, it'll be the older brother's sons. Why does that become really important?
Because it keeps the family lines going.
It keeps the family line going, and you got inheritance issues because the firstborn usually gets the double share of the second. So it keeps it going. You've got boys in this line, and Tamar has some sons to take care of her, right, in her old age. Now, Onan knows that these are not going to be his kids, right? And so I don't want to get into what he does, but he does something that isn't good.
He made sure she didn't get pregnant.
He makes sure she doesn't conceive, right? He makes sure she doesn't conceive, and in the sight of God,
That's a no-no.
that's a bad thing. And we're going to find that, understand, that's going to be in the law. We're going to see that in the law.
Wouldn't you think that his wife would be jealous? I mean, I would like my husband to my brother-in-law's wife.
You know, you do what you got to do.
Poor man.
You do what you got to do. Remember, these guys they got concubines and maids and all kinds of stuff. So, so here we've lost Onan. So and Onan are done. Tamar would appear to be what? If you had to label Tamar, she would appear to be...
Unfortunate.
Yeah, you call her unfortunate, you call her bad
She
luck.
wasn't lucky in love.
Yeah, she was lucky. Now Daddy Israel has, or Daddy Judah sees two of his sons.
Married
One
to this
married
woman.
Tamar, dies. Second one marries Tamar, dies. Third one here.
Third son. He's not old enough to.
Well, that's what Judah says, and so it's now Sheila's responsibility. And Judah says, fool me once, shame on me. This is a problem. She's maybe kind of a black widow.
But he's a kid, but then here he's going to wait till he grows up.
Well, that's what he tells her. You come and, you just hang around the house. You just hang around the house until Sheila is old enough. Well, daddy-in-law, Sheila's 34. Well, he's still an immature 34. So you need to let him grow up a little bit. He needs to grow up. So she's hanging around the house. And she's
at her father's house.
Yeah, at her father's house. And she's looking at Sheila, and Sheila
is looking pretty.
Yeah, he's older now.
Good.
Yeah, he is plenty old enough. Which means, what does she recognize that Judah's doing?
Cheating her.
He's cheating her. To do what? Now his motivation is
To save his son.
He's going to save his son because this woman consumes sons. And to save the son, I'm going to, we'll do that. And so she comes up with a plan that any woman would do. Any woman in her position would do. Right? What has happened to Judah after
His wife.
His wife
dies?
dies.
So the Canaanite woman so Judah is now footloose and fancy free. He is now unencumbered by marriage. And Tamar says,
Doesn't like it.
I got an idea. and one is as she is grieving because she's wearing black, right? Or whatever. She's grieving. What does Tamar end up doing?
Take off her widow's clothes and gets a little hot.
She she acquires heavily massacred eyes. She puts on a lot of makeup, right? But a veil. And puts on a rather,
You do those little
a
dancing
rather
things like
saucy,
that.
a rather saucy outfit. Cut up here.
A little thin.
Little veil on her. Hey, big boy. Come here often, sailor. And so she gets herself all dolled up, but not just, dolled up. She knows what she's doing. And she goes and starts sitting.
Where Judah's going to come by.
Yeah, Judah's got sheep in the field. And Judah's going to come by this place. And it's kind of interesting, where would she, you do your best business on Main Street, right? Business does its best. Where is she hanging out?
On the side of the road.
She's at the side of the road. Later she's going to be called a temple prostitute. And temples were places where prostitutes hung out. In fact, that was encouraged in pagan temples. They thought it was a good idea. Now, why would in pagan and agrarian cultures, why would
Fertility.
having prostitutes around your temple be a good thing? Fertility. That's why in most ancient cultures, agrarian cultures, well, you actually in a lot of, and actually what you ended up with is you had a lot of priestesses, female priests, because you were encouraging fertility. And that's, so when back then, women didn't have any problem getting their husbands to church. That was no big issue. Women didn't have any problems getting their husbands to church. In fact, they'd go to studies 2 or 3 times a week. But that's what it was. So that's where she was. That's what she was dressed as. And so she's hanging around the road. Judah comes by, and Judah thought she was a prostitute. And of course, since he thinks he's a prostitute, he says, how much? And they make a deal. And what's the deal they make? He said, well, how much you got? And he says, I will give you a goat. A goat. I will give you a goat. And she says, I don't see any goat on you. And he says, well, he says, oh, the goat's in the maid.
Yeah, right, buddy.
Yeah,
okay.
And she says, I wasn't born yesterday. I want something so I get the goat, right? And what do you want? And she says, well, I'll take your signet ring, and I'll take
your belt,
and
your
I'll take
stick.
I'll take that, and I'm going to hold that as collateral. And when you bring me my goat, then you can have the other stuff. And Judah says, sounds like a deal to me. And so Judah and Tamar,
He was ready to go.
he's ready to go. He's ready to go to church. And he and Tamar do their thing. And Tamar ends up being
Pregnant.
And then after she and Judah do their thing, and see, all of this seems to be assumed. She takes the makeup off and takes the saucy clothes off and goes back to her father's house and dresses like a widow. The only problem is the widow is getting
bigger. And bigger.
She's getting large. And it becomes obvious that the widow is pregnant. Well, that's a bad thing, right? Because it's okay for Judah to go to church,
but not
but
for the girl.
not
a widow.
Yes, not a widow. Although Judah is a widower But that's neither here nor there.
That didn't bother
That's inappropriate for her, right? And of course, Judah is,
Compassionate.
yeah, his initial reaction, because it's his daughter-in-law twice, is
A
compassion,
chance
right?
to get rid of her.
Burn her.
A chance to get rid of her. I don't have to worry about my
Well,
son.
he doesn't know yet, because she had a veil, so he couldn't see her. He didn't know her as the one he met, because she was veiled.
Yeah.
So he says, as a righteous person, burn. Give me the matches. I'll light them. I'll start the fire. And Tamar says, ooh, before you burn me,
Do you know
anybody who could use this stuff? And what does she bring out?
The ring, the sword, and the...
A ring, a belt, and
His walking
a staff.
stick.
And Judah
That
says,
is not, oh my.
oops.
She's more righteous than I am.
Okay, and so Judah recognizes that Tamar was the one he thought was a prostitute, right?
And she's
And,
more righteous than he is because she followed the law.
And
This Canaanite woman.
that's right. And he knew what he had done wrong. And it wasn't visiting a prostitute.
Nope.
What had Judah done wrong?
He hadn't given a son.
He withheld Shelah from her. That was the problem. And so she was the one that comes out better in this story, right? And so what ends up happening between Judah and Tamar?
They get married.
No.
But they don't. They don't have any more relations. So it's not like he takes her as his wife, But she does bear sons to him, right? And we're experiencing a little deja vu again, because once the situation with the sons,
Twins.
you got twins, but an odd birth, a strange birth. And what's the situation with the birth? The first one puts a hand out, and the midwife says, oh, I got to remember who came first. So ties, and then the hand goes back in, and then the other one is born, and you have these twin boys, which means the one who's actually born first should be the most important one, but won't be.
Because it's
It won't be the most important. And so we've got twin sons to Judah. Now, this is a story that's interesting to the people who live in the south, because it's about the tribe of Judah, but the people in the north could care less. It's not about them. It's not about them. This is sort of a southern story. What makes this story interesting, though, is how it's used in the New Testament. Does anybody here know how weird this odd little story is used in the New Testament? How is it used?
In the New Testament?
Yeah.
I was just thinking that the firstborn son without the thing on it was in Jesus' line of birth. His lineage.
That's when Matthew gives the lineage of Jesus. And Matthew starts with Abraham. So it's a very Jewish, as opposed to Luke, who ends with Adam. So it's a little different. But when he gets to Judah, he mentions Esau. And what is interesting, and this is what Matthew does, is he does the chronology. In the chronology of Matthew, Matthew mentions 4 women. Tamar is 1. Rahab is 2. Ruth is 3.
And Mary.
And Bathsheba is 4. And if you look at those 4 women, doesn't mention Rachel, doesn't mention Rebekah, doesn't mention any of those 4. Tamar played a prostitute. Rahab
Was a prostitute.
was a prostitute. Ruth
Was a Moabite.
was a Moabite, was a foreigner. And
Bathsheba was an adulteress.
Lord have mercy. The story of Bathsheba is not a noble one. And so it becomes really, really interesting that the evangelist Matthew, as he's just doing a chronology, and it's, so-and-so begot so-and-so, begot so-and-so, begot, that he includes 4 women, none of whom the world would view as
Exemplary.
noble or exemplary. All of them were flawed, or have a flaw in either their character or their nature that would cause them not to be what you'd expect in the chronology of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. So it becomes really interesting how it's used in the New Testament, not unlike Jacob and Esau, how Paul uses the story of Jacob and Esau in his letter to the Romans. So but this was like a little insertion. We're into the Joseph story. Thank you very much. Thank you. Into the Joseph story. We're going to come back to the Joseph story next chapter. So, any questions about this? By the time we get to this point, what's Joseph's situation?
He's hanging out with Potiphar.
He's been sold to Potiphar, captain of the guard in Egypt.
That's all we know.
That's all we know. And we're going to pick up on that next week. Okay? So let's have a word of prayer, and then next week we can be back in our little room. Lord God, thank you so much for using flawed people in your story. Because if you didn't use flawed people, you wouldn't be able to use us. And so we appreciate that. We also appreciate the fact that you're forcing us to focus our attention on you and not on them. Because you're the one we worship. We don't worship Abraham and Isaac and Jacob or Israel or Joseph or Judah or anybody else. We worship you. And so we thank you for giving us that focus as you tell your story. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.